Hello, builders of good. Thank you for tuning in to the Build Good Fundraising podcast. Fundraising isn't easy, but it should be simple. So on this show, we take the mystery out of raising money. Now, on each episode, we coach you to build your fundraising like a flywheel. The flywheel has 5 steps. Number 1 is listening to donors. Number 2 is engaging them. Number 3 is asking the right people for the right things. Number 4 is celebrating every gift. And number 5 is reporting back. And if you master the 5 parts of the flywheel, your fundraising flywheel will start to spin reliably with less effort on your part. Your revenue will grow, and so will your career. Now, every week we focus on one part of the flywheel, and today we're actually focusing on 3 parts of the flywheel. We're focusing on listening, engaging, and asking. Now, if you remember, asking is all about asking the right people for the right things. So today we are specifically talking about asking for large gifts, asking major donors to make a large gift to your organization. Now, we don't often get into major gifts on this podcast. In fact, this podcast is all about creating a pipeline for monthly, for mid, for major, and for legacy donors. So today we'll get into what to actually do with that pipeline in terms of identifying who can give more and how to approach them. And we're talking to Gudrun Hofmeister. She's an expert in 6- and 7-figure gifts. Gudrun has spent 15 years managing and preparing for successful capital campaigns. And as the owner of Philanthropic Fundraising, she helps nonprofits secure the largest gift in their organization's history. That's what today is about. That's what we want for you. So let's get right into it. Here's my conversation with Gudrun Hofmeister. Gudrun, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
You and I met in this program, which is not related to fundraising at all. And somehow we each found the other fundraiser in the room.
Yes, I think we're the only fundraisers.
Yeah. In fact, somebody reached out because I was talking about our clients being directors of development. And somebody in that program was like, oh, are you multifamily or are you like, what is, which area are you in? And I was like, I don't understand your question. He's like, well, you work with directors of development, right? Like housing development. I was like, no.
Directors of development, a euphemism.
Yeah, I'm about to disappoint you here. This is about fundraising, not building big buildings. Although sometimes it's about building big buildings. So.
Actually, a lot of the projects I work on are about building big buildings.
Yeah, we're going to talk today about what you are really, really, really good at, which is helping organizations get potentially the largest gift they've ever gotten in their history. And this is something that I think everybody dreams of, is getting big gifts. Very few organizations know how to go about it. Very few organizations seem to invest in it. But it's for sure something everybody dreams of. Is that, do you see that a lot?
It does seem like there's a disconnect. The large organizations, they're very focused on this, and they understand that this is their lifeblood, is going to be their major gifts program, because typically the major gifts program is going to bring, at least 80% of their annual fundraising revenue. And the remaining 20% is going to come from your mailing list, your $100 donors. So the larger institutions, the hospitals, the universities tend to understand that intuitively, and they build their fundraising program around that. The smaller shops, not so much. So things may be a bit skewed. However, oftentimes when we start to look at their donor database, we still find that 80-20 rule applies. It's just the top donor might be a $5,000 donor.
Right. Yeah. But it still is just a smaller percent of people, a very small percent of people doing most of the giving for most organizations.
You're right. Yeah.
Yes.
And what often happens is if you have a small fundraising shop, the majority of the effort is going into the golf tournament. It's going into the appeals. It's going into making sure the emails go out in the newsletters. And there's just not as much attention paid to that $5,000 donor. It's just kind of taken for granted. Like, of course, Mary's going to stroke a check for $5,000. She does so every December, and nothing really more, no more attention is paid to that. Whereas larger organizations often will have systems in place to make sure that, Mary is taken out to lunch and, she's approached about opportunities that are coming down the pike. And whereas smaller shops, they just don't have the resources to be able to give their top donors that kind of attention.
Right. Well, so here's what I'd like to do today. Let's do something for the smaller shops. Let's make sure that people know that you can raise a 6-figure gift, maybe even a 7-figure gift. You can get the best gift in your organization's history. It is within reach. There's a lot of limiting beliefs that smaller shops deal with. That just comes from not having a lot of resources. And I get that. I don't want to downplay that at all. But let's run through a fictitious scenario. Are you okay with that?
Yes, that sounds good. I'm excited.
All right. So let's say that the director of development of Caring Hearts Inc. Approaches you, and she's heard about all the work that you do. She's seen you on LinkedIn. She's interested in working with you. And this is what she has to say. She says, Gudrun, Caring Hearts Inc., we're a small shop. We've got big hearts. We do a lot of great job in the community, like vital services that we provide for some of our community's most vulnerable people. And in fact, if we weren't around, I don't even know what would happen because there's no programs from the government to take care of these people. They would be like this disaster. Like, we're the best kept secret in town, but we only raise about $1 million every year from our donors. And gosh, if I could raise 2 or 3 million, I just know we could more than double or triple what we can do for these people. And life would look so much different, and we would have so much more impact. And I believe that's possible. I think we can go from 1 million to 2 million, but my board isn't quite sure, and I've never done this before. Can you help me out with this?
Absolutely. So the first thing I would start to talk about would be the exciting plans that the organization has for the future. So I would try to understand, are we trying to go from 1 million to 2 to 3 million as more of a vanity metric because, it sounds good? Or what could we accomplish that we can't accomplish now at a $2 million annual raise versus a $1 million annual raise? So if we double our fundraising revenue, what does that mean? Are we able to serve double the number of families? Are we able to open up a new center? What problem are we trying to solve?
Right. I want to give the CEO a little bit of a handicap here and make it even tougher, because I want you to walk us through a scenario that is like, if we solve the worst case scenario, then we can solve all the other scenarios.
Sure.
So the easy answer would be, yeah, we want to build a new center and then we can serve twice as many people. So that would be a capital campaign.
Correct.
And capital campaigns tends to be easier to raise larger gifts for capital campaigns because there's a building behind it. You can show people blueprints. You can cast a vision. There's something physical people can see, touch, feel, imagine. But let's say that the CEO of Caring Hearts Inc., let's say she does not have a capital campaign. But if she went from 1 million to 2 million, they could serve twice as many families, however that looks like, whether that's hiring more staff but they could. There's a lot of unmet need in the community. And if they made it to 2 million, she feels like they could meet most of that need and do a way better job.
Absolutely. And we see that happen as well. So yes, you're right. Capital campaigns where there's a bricks and mortar component are easier. Donors understand it and they either want to support it or they don't. With capital campaigns, I would actually say this is still potentially a capital campaign, if not a major gift fundraising effort, but it could be captured as a capital campaign that we want to double our programs. We want to double the size of the number of families that we serve. We want to expand our outreach. Maybe it's our footprint. And that is something that donors can understand. It's quantifiable. You need to have a SMART goal, specific, measurable, actionable, reality-based, and time. There's some time constraints around it. So if you have a SMART goal, you could potentially have a capital campaign on your hands, even if you don't think you do. So go back and look at the strategic plan. If it's something like, oh, we want to streamline our services or we want to increase our staff. No, donors don't really get jazzed about that. That's kind of more operations. But if it's a big, bold vision, something that just scares you a little bit, like, oh, how are we going to do this? You might potentially have a capital campaign on your hands.
Okay. So this CEO is in kind of a smaller market, raising $1 million. And she knows with 2 million, and maybe it scares her a little bit, we can start to say we're ending homelessness in the community. Like no family homeless. That about would provide all the services that when a family loses their home due to not being able to make rent, due to some circumstance that comes up, we got you, we can take care of you, we can get you back into a house. We can start to place you, we can start to get you into a program that will get you back to work or that will find appropriate housing. We can have some temporary maybe accommodation for you. So let's say that's just for the fictitious sort of the purpose of this conversation. $2 million means no family in our community will have to be homeless for very long.
That's a sort of like, it gives you goosebumps kind of moment where somebody can make that kind of claim and they actually have a plan. That's something that donors get really enthusiastic about. If you can go out there and say, if we can raise an additional $1 million each year, and especially if that can be spread out over several years, let's say you need $1 million is kind of like a startup. And so if really you're only talking about $200,000 a year over the next 5 years, that's very, very doable if you're already raising $1 million each year. Now, if you need to raise another $1 million each year,
right,
and you need to be able to sustain this, really, you're talking about a $5 million capital campaign because you're going to need a 5-year runway. You can't just raise $1 million in 1 year and then boom, problem solved. This needs to be sustainable. So I would push back a little bit on that. I would ask some questions and make sure they really do have not only, the vision, but also a plan to get there.
Okay, so you're pushing me to think bigger. Yes, 2 million will mean no family homeless, but that's just for the next year. And then what happens the year after that? So
yes,
you're saying, hey, think bigger. This is your chance to approach donors with a big vision. Don't limit yourself.
Exactly. And if you're really talking about a $5 million campaign, because you need $1 million this year, and again, each year for the next 5 years, then we're looking at a 5-year capital campaign. Well, it's not a 5-year capital campaign in terms of it's not going to take 5 years to raise that. You're going to get the commitments up front that are going to be paid over the next 5 years. So in grand total, that's a $5 million capital campaign. And for an organization that raises $1 million annually, that's achievable.
Okay. So you got my hopes up. You're saying it is possible. So you're saying there's a chance. What's my next step? Like, how do I start? What do I do now?
Sure. Yes. Well, since we already brushed on the case for support, which is what you and I were kind of just workshopping, we would talk next about securing a key leader. And I will get into that in a moment. But since your work is really focused on, helping organizations with their annual fund and making sure they have a robust, prospect list that is supporting the organization year in and year out, let's talk about that for a little bit. Because these shops that are raising $1 million a year, their bread and butter is probably their annual appeal. Maybe they have a gala. So they already are going to have a robust donor list. So as part of the process of helping these organizations understand what is even possible, I would want to ask them, who are your top donors? You don't have to give names, but is your top donor giving you $5,000 a year? Is your top donor giving you more than that? Is it just your board who's supporting you at those levels and nobody else? Does no one on your board give you at that level, but you have, maybe a couple of friends of the organization who give? So I'd start to ask in this fictitious example, paint a picture for me of your top donors.
Got it. Okay, so the largest gift that we've ever received at Caring Hearts Inc. was $50,000, and it wasn't even a gift we asked for. It just kind of came to us. Somebody's parents passed away, they got a big inheritance, and they chose us as part of some of the charitable giving that they had to do for tax purposes. But most of our gifts are below the $1,000 range. We've got a golf tournament, we've got a gala. Those two things raise a decent amount of money just in corporate sponsorships. But then really most of operating comes from people who are giving $100, $500, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 per year. So our major donor program is a bunch of people giving between $3,000 to $15,000 per year.
Okay. And a bunch of people, maybe a dozen or so, you would say?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we might have 10 to 15 at the top who do most of the larger gifts. And again, large gifts for us are like, if we get a $3,000 check, we're thrilled.
Okay. Fair enough. And then the $50,000 donor, was that a couple of years ago? Was that really recent? How long ago was that?
Yeah, that was 2 years ago. And that is the person who made that gift whose parents passed away. They are a donor of ours, and they give us $10,000 every year.
Okay, excellent. Great. All right. So to delve a little bit further on this example, we would probably start having a conversation about that $10,000 annual donor who gave that $50,000 gift. Because what we're doing here when we're looking at a major gifts program or preparing for a capital campaign is we're really trying to skim the cream off of the top.
Okay.
And you've got to be looking at the annual fund, the operation support as kind of like planting the seeds. And some of them have grown into trees that have then borne some fruit, and we have to climb those trees and start to pick that fruit before it gets overripe, and it sounds like that $50,000 gift was kind of an overripe fruit. That person was never approached. They had what we call liquidity event, and they had to make some decisions. Yeah. And clearly your organization is their top priority, unless they gave a larger gift to another.
To be honest, I don't even know. Exactly. We may have been one of many. They may have given a $500,000 gift to somebody else as part of that liquidity event. I don't know.
Exactly. Well, we can do some digging. Those of us in this profession, have access to resources where we can find out, did they give $50,000 to you and $1 million to another organization? And maybe it's because that organization asked for $1 million and you didn't. So, but if you're their top prospect, and this is something, or top priority, philanthropic priority, then this is something that happens where organizations, because they haven't had the conversation, they haven't uncovered this information, that we as consultants can come in and start to ask these questions. And we come to find out that your organization is their favorite charity, and you didn't even know.
Right.
And this individual is capable of giving $1 million, but they've never been asked. So in this fictitious example, let's say we find out that this $50,000 donor did give $1 million. It was to their alma mater. And then perhaps we down the road have a conversation. I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but let's say we have a conversation perhaps as part of a feasibility study, and we uncover that they're not really happy with their alma mater right now. So they gave that $1 million, but they're not really happy with what was done with it. They were not appropriately stewarded. And we look at perhaps they have a family foundation, and, we pull up their Form 990s in the US where all of the annual giving is listed. Mm-hmm. And we see, that they've kind of started to tear down their giving. They, gave only $100,000 to their alma mater. And now they're thinking, I'm not sure if I'm even going to support them anymore. Now that door is open, that Caring Hearts could approach them for $1 million request. Mm-hmm. It would be paid over 5 years. So that's a $200,000 a year commitment for the next 5 years. And this is something that this donor could consider.
If I found out that they gave $1 million to their alma mater, I'll be honest with you, I would be a little heartbroken, because their alma mater has like hundreds of millions of dollars in an endowment fund. Yeah. Surely they would have known that Caring Hearts is in need of a lot more money than a prestigious university, don't you think?
Isn't it fascinating that wealthy families give to wealthy institutions, and, the mom and pop shops just don't seem to be the recipient at that level. If you look at the news, that's what you see. Large foundations give large gifts to large organizations. But if you think about it as a very disruptive event, if an organization were to suddenly receive a check for $1 million and their annual fundraising budget is $1 million, that could be quite disruptive for that organization. They would first have to think about, okay, well, what are we even going to do with this gift? This covers our annual fundraise for each year. So it's more of a process, and it might be disconcerting. It might be uncomfortable. It might cause issues. Whereas if they were to give $1 million and this is an organization that raises, $350 million each year, then they know that gift is going to be used appropriately. There's systems and procedures in place, and there's not really going to be an issue. So the way that small shop organizations need to overcome that is they need to have a plan, an idea, a vision that's worthy of $1 million. It has to be $1 million idea. And so your idea of ending homelessness, and I'll give you credit because this is your example, is $1 million idea. I mean, who wouldn't want to end homelessness if all they had to do, and I'm, saying this a bit facetiously, but really for some donors, if all they have to do is write a check for $1 million, and then the promise is that you could solve homelessness in my community, great. Sign me up.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to set you up a little bit here, because as CEO of Caring Hearts, I get that. I get that the big university can absorb a larger gift, but man, why didn't the donor come to me first and ask if we could make use of a larger gift? Or are you saying that's my responsibility to go to them and make sure they know about it?
Well, let's go back to the sequential order that I mentioned earlier, which is the case for support is what we talked about initially. Mm-hmm. The next step is securing a key leader. And the step after that is asking for a 6 or 7 figure commitment. And so in our example, you started to talk about a potential case for support. Maybe this organization has had this in the works for some time. Maybe they just came up with it at a strategic planning session, last month. Regardless, you have to have that case for support first. So no beating yourself up, fictitious executive director, that you didn't go to them at that time because you didn't have $1 million idea. Why would you ask them for $1 million? So the next step would be recruiting a key leader. And sometimes the key leader is you, executive director. Maybe there's nobody else who is comfortable, willing, appropriate to approach this donor. Maybe this donor is somebody with whom you've had a relationship for, 10 years. Maybe it's not, maybe it's a member of the board and they came onto the board through another board member, their best buddies. That other board member gives $10,000 a year and is their peer.
Yeah. In
that case, we would want to recruit that peer leader, which is the ideal scenario. We want to recruit a peer leader who gives a similar amount. And we ask that peer leader to invite that prospective donor to consider a gift of $1 million. So there is a process there of sussing out, who is the right person to ask for this gift. And maybe it's you, executive director. Maybe it's you and a board member. The best case scenario, you go as a team of 2 and you team up to ask for this gift. But yes, ultimately, if you only have those 2 ingredients in place and you don't actually ask for the gift, then they are just going to turn around and give that gift to the organization that did ask for it.
Yeah. Okay. Let's spend a bit of time on the key leader, because that's interesting. So the case for support, you've challenged us to think a lot bigger. Forget about the extra $1 million. Ask for $5 million. Put together a case for support of what that's going to do over the next 5 years. And in this small community, that is going to mean that no family and no person actually ends up chronically homeless. And you are going to be this wonderful organization that everybody wakes up every morning making sure that nobody is homeless that day. Fantastic. And that's a great vision somebody can buy into. I'm with you. The key leader sounds amazing, because right now I feel like as the executive director, I'm doing it all by myself. But let's talk about if you options that I might have for a key leader? You already mentioned maybe somebody on the board.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other options? What should I consider when I'm thinking about who should be the key leader on this
Yeah.
initiative?
Yeah. I would say ideally it's somebody on the board, but we've definitely worked with organizations where they're like, the board. It's like, don't get me started. There's a
Yep.
sense of frustration. The board members are not living up to expectations. Perhaps it's a past board member. I mean, that's often the case as we start to kind of bring somebody back into the fold who's maybe stepped off the board a couple of years ago, but has stayed involved. Perhaps it's a member of the development committee who just new to the organization, but has a lot of energy. So there's different ways that we can look at this. It doesn't necessarily have to be a board member. However, if you are frustrated with your board, this is a great time if you've got this vision to start recruiting new potential leaders. And as organizations are preparing for a capital campaign, you get the opportunity to recruit them for a capital campaign committee. And this is when you can start to reach out to kind of the key leaders in your community. Maybe there's somebody who runs a gala for another organization, and maybe they're getting a little burned out and they're ready to move on to a different organization. Maybe you've had a few conversations with them and they seem excited. This is your chance to say, we have the opportunity here to end homelessness in our community. Is this something you want to be a part of? And you can kind of feel them out. So it's not as though you have to always go to the people who have been with you, been serving on your board. This is a time to look at new blood. This is also a time to go back to maybe your leaders who were engaged in the past, but maybe they just kind of started to fade away when they were no longer needed to serve, say, on the board. But what really excellent leaders want is they want a job, they want to have a goal. And when you come to them with a SMART goal, and there's a measure of success where they can say, check, I accomplished that. Leaders are driven by accomplishing these goals, so if you can give them a job and it has a start point, it has an end point, you can something that is measurable, that they can know whether they've succeeded or not. There's a barometer of, well, have we raised 5 million or not? Key leaders are going to be attracted to that.
Yeah, got it. Is this a volunteer position?
It's a volunteer position. However, we've also partnered with organizations where the executive director is the de facto leader. And that works as well, as long as the executive director understands that they are going to have to offload a lot of their operational roles. Right. So that they can devote enough time. In an ideal world, and a lot of hospitals and universities understand this, 70% of the executive director's time is devoted to fundraising. I understand with smaller shops that might not be possible, but can you carve out 3 hours on your calendar each week that's simply set aside to go on donor go on donor visits and scheduling those meetings? If so, we can work with you.
Got it. So even, if I don't find a key leader and it's going to be the executive director, sounds like it would still be helpful to have a quarterback to help with scheduling meetings and sort of like taking care of some of the admin burden that comes along with that.
Yes. Executive directors that are really successful at fundraising and don't get burned out really easily tend to have a great assistant supporting them that can do all their scheduling for them, do all the back and forth, handle the logistics. And then, of course, those of us in the consulting world can also wear these hats and help make sure that, you're held accountable, that these things are getting done. So it's not just you by yourself, staring at a screen, writing an email to this $1 million prospect. We're there to hold your hand. We're there to give you talking points. We provide that background research as to why we know they're capable of giving $1 million to give you that, confidence boost and that sort of thing.
So you mentioned something interesting, which is knowing what they're capable of giving you a confidence boost. Mm-hmm. Because in the back of your mind, I'm not asking for anything outrageous here.
Right.
I mean, I might be because they may not consider me to be in that league. That could be possible. But I'm not asking for something where in their mind, the other person is going, I don't even have that much money to give. Why are you like this?
Right. Yeah. There's a certain stratosphere that your top donors are going to qualify into where it's less of an issue. So for example, oftentimes when we're in a capital campaign and we're doing the board division, which is all about securing 100% board commitment, oftentimes there'll be hand wringing among, the volunteers saying, oh, do we ask them for $25,000 or do we ask them for $50,000? And I'm always like, the 25 versus 50 is not going to make or break this campaign. Just do what you're comfortable with. But in the case where we're looking at $1 million prospects, we're talking about billionaires here. And if you don't ask them for $1 million, their alma mater is going to ask them for $1 million. Their house of worship is going to ask them for $1 million. So you just need to keep in mind that this is just a different realm that these people operate in. And if you have somebody of that capability in your midst, it's just a different mindset. It's not that, 25,000 versus 50,000 or, $500 versus $1,000, to them, if they are capable of making a commitment at that level, I've never once seen anyone be offended by being asked. It's you're either one of their top priorities or they're not. And that's something that we can uncover during, say, a feasibility study.
Right. Yeah. The first major gift I ever secured was $250,000. And I can't even take the credit because the donor was telling me that that's how much they were going to give. And my immediate reaction, I don't know why. I have no idea why I did this. I almost tried to persuade them not to give that much money. My immediate reaction was like, are you sure? Do you want to spread this out over a few years? And they were kind of confused. They're like, no, dude, trying to give you a gift.
There's a certain amount of just if you were to have that happen to you every single week over the course of a year, you would get very blasé about it. And there is a certain amount of that. It's, a gravitas that you just get when you're in this world that I understand if other people are not accustomed to it. And there's certainly areas of expertise I do not have, and I just have to trust the expert, and that's what happens when you work with a consultant is we say, okay, they're giving $250,000 to, 5 other organizations. You can ask for $250,000. And then, yes, it might be a little awkward at first, but you'll get used to it in a good way.
Right. Okay. So I've kind of got an idea of who I want the key leader to be. Do I gently maybe touch on this being also a legacy thing? Like this is something that you can be part of, that will be part of the values that you eventually leave behind in this world. You get to do we sort of approach it from that angle as well because it's a volunteer position, or what's our best foot forward to make sure this key leader is all in?
Well, we do want to touch on the heartstrings. For example, I worked with a client and they served the developmentally disabled, and our key leader had a daughter who was being served by this organization. So it was a very easy sell as to why we needed their help. And this was a past board member who had kind of become a little disengaged, but with the idea that we could renovate the headquarters and build an endowment that would ultimately make sure that his daughter was well cared for long after he's gone, it was a no-brainer for him. So if there's something really, if there's an enlightened self-interest component, definitely be transparent about that. If it's a little more vague and indirect, then you can ask leading questions, which you're very good at, asking leading questions where you're trying to uncover what do they want their legacy to be, and that is something that we touch upon when we do a feasibility study, in that we ask about their top priorities, we ask about what they appreciate about the organization. So it starts to bring to light some of where the match is between the donor's interests, the donor's values, and where the organization is headed, to see if this could be a good fit in terms of where that volunteer could apply their time and their energy to help make this vision a reality.
Got it. Okay, so the key leader's in. We've got a case for support, $5 million in 5 years will end homelessness in our community. We've got the key leader who's all in. The last step, and it seems like the hardest step, is it's getting those gifts, getting those commitments. How do we do this? Where do we even start here?
Sure. So best case scenario, your key leader is also your top donor. So we would just want to start there because it's not always the case, but it sure is nice. And the example that I just gave, it was the case. So the person that we recruited to chair the campaign was also actually did not turn out to be our top gift. The top gift surprisingly came from a foundation that had never supported this organization before, and they got really lucky. But that he made the lead gift. And the lead gift is a gift that ideally is at least 20% of the overall goal. Okay. So in this scenario, if we've got a $5 million capital campaign, we need to secure a gift of $1 million. And it can be paid over several years. So we talk about it in terms of a commitment, which means that we just want a commitment from the individual or organization, such as a foundation, for example, that they're going to pay maybe $200,000 a year over 5 years for a total commitment of $1 million. So it doesn't have to come in the form of one check, but we do need that commitment. And that sends the signal to all the other donors that this is not just regular operating. This is not just a normal day at this organization. This is an exciting new chapter. This is time to raise your giving sites. We're going into a different level in terms of this organization's fundraising. And now you should think about Caring Hearts in the same way that you think about as your alma mater or your place of worship. So that signaling gift helps elevate the giving sites of everyone else around you. And you simply you're just not going to get the momentum of a campaign, and the campaign might peter out without such a gift, a signaling gift. So if this key leader is also our top prospect, and we know we've done our research, we know they can give $1 million, then we ask for their leadership and we ask for their top gift at the same time, because we explain that this will help send a message to other prospective donors. Yeah. If they're two separate people, then we secure that key leader. We ask them for a gift that they're capable of. Maybe they're capable of giving $100,000. Ideally, we want them in the same ilk. We don't want a $5,000 donor going and approaching $1 million donor. So, if it's a 7-figure donor, best case, they're also giving 7 figures. But in this example, at least a 6-figure commitment. So perhaps they're able to commit $20,000 a year. They normally give 10. Now they're giving 20 each year for the next 5 years. And then they've made their commitment of $100,000. So now there's confidence. There's a certain level of, well, I'm not asking you to do something that I haven't done myself, which, by the way, we also ask the executive director to do the same. And executive directors often will step forward and make a gift of, say, $1,000, and maybe they give it through their payroll, but they're making a sacrificial gift. Then they approach this key leader who also makes a sacrificial gift. And sacrificial is not the best word, but a leadership gift. And then that key leader is then able to approach that $1 million donor and ask for $1 million because they've already made it a significant commitment themselves.
So getting a key gift off the bat is important because it signals to other people, this is serious. This is no more small boy stuff. We're in the big leagues now. Number 2 is there's a bit of social proof. Like donors like me give gifts like these. That's a little bit, that's what it's signaling. And I'm imagining it also gives you a ton of internal confidence. I don't know who, bit of a deviation here, but somebody at Apple was saying, like, Apple just famously has a ton of cash on hand, like way more cash on hand than they need to. And somebody was asked, like, why do you have so much cash on hand? Like, why do you just have these cash reserves? And there was like, oh, it just gives us swagger. Like we can just be confident. Like we've got all this cash. It just gives us confidence to say no to the stuff we want to say no to, and to pursue kind of the crazy stuff we want to pursue, because we're good. Just seeing this amount of cash in a bank account just gives us like confidence. So I imagine there's a bit to that as well.
I would love to see more nonprofits embrace that attitude. Just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean you can't be always in the cash positive, why you can't grow and, bring more money in than you spend each year. You don't have to have a balanced budget each year. You can, bring in more, because then you're investing in the future of the organization. You can take some risks. Maybe you're able to ride out leaner times. And yeah, it does give confidence. So when you're projecting out, build in a buffer, include in your budget cash reserves, include in your budget funds that you could set aside for an endowment, which would then grow over time. And, those are funds that you can count on. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's about shifting the mindset of the board, of the executive director, of the director of development, from that kind of poverty mindset of like, oh, there's no way we can do this, to a place of abundance that, we have. The money is never the problem. Really, when it comes down to it, it all starts with leadership. If the leadership have the right attitude, if you have a $5 million idea, it's amazing how the board that you have now might look completely different 5 years from now, because all those people who just didn't have the right mindset to be able to go out and ask for $1 million gifts and six-figure gifts, they start to drift away. But the people who value your mission, want to end homelessness in this example, and understand that, yeah, we need to be bold, we need to go out and ask for big gifts, they're the ones who are going to rise to the top. And all of a sudden you have an organization that's run by people like, of course, we're going to go and ask for $100,000 because we need it, because we're not playing around here. We're ending homelessness.
Yeah. Yeah. All this tracks with, we've got, we talk about the two key indicators that your fundraising is going to be successful. Is number one is the strength of your relationship with your donors. Number two is the quality of your business decisions. And everything you're talking about is like quality of your business decisions. This isn't a fundraising problem. This is like a business decision problem. And I am wondering, so we've got the key leader and we got the key gift, and maybe the leader made the gift or maybe somebody else did, but we're at 20%. So we got to go to all these other people. And you mentioned before, hey, there's some people on your file that you can start with. Who would we start with on our file? Like anybody who's like top 20 or like top 10, or is there a money amount, or what do you look for when we start with the donors right in front of us already?
You're absolutely right. Once you have that top gift, it is time to start looking into your file. And whether it's the top 10 or top 20, I mean, it just depends on how many donors you have in your organization. But typically we are looking at the top 10% of your donors. So, if you were to have a database of 1,000 donors, then you're only really looking at your top 100. And that could be measured by cumulative giving over the last 5 years. A great cutoff point when we're doing this right now with a client is just pull a donor list and make the cutoff. They've given at least $5,000 a year, at least $5,000 cumulatively over the last 5 years.
Okay, so that's where you would start.
Yes.
5,000 cumulative giving over the last 5 years. That's the bare minimum, sort of where we start. And
that's a great starting point. Yeah. So if somebody's giving you $1,000 a year, or they've just randomly given you a $5,000 gift, they're sending you a signal, and you need to pick up on that signal. Hey, I could give more.
Got it. Okay. That will be news to some people listening, which is some people might think, oh, that, amazing. They're giving $1,000 a year, without thinking, hey, this might be them raising their hand and saying, I could be serious about this thing. And I believe in what you're doing.
When you think about it, who just writes a check for $1,000 without being asked, if there isn't a lot more there? And yes, there are some cases where it's an absolute stretch for them to give $1,000. And there's some reason why, your organization is the organization. They're writing a check for $1,000. They absolutely cannot do anything more. They're not giving anything similar to any other organization. But that's the rarity. Typically, if a donor is giving you $1,000 and they didn't get asked for it, usually it's worth digging to see. They could probably give $5,000 a year. And if you were to multiply that by 5, there's a $25,000 gift right there. And that's kind of our cutoff point for looking at top prospects to a $5 million project. You're not going to raise $5 million from $100 donors. They need to be donors who are giving at least $5,000 a year for this to be an undertaking that's going to be successful. And at the end of the campaign, you might only end up with 100 donors. So it's a very small pool.
Yeah. Absolutely. Which makes sense. You need to be smart about your time and how you're spending your time as well. So people don't realize that a lot of philanthropy comes from a very small amount of people. And that is a large lever you can pull, and that you should pull before you invest too much effort elsewhere.
Right. And the work that you do and that your clients do is absolutely essential. It's a great starting point, but you do have to think about it as planting seeds. Yeah. Those seeds then grow into trees, and you do need to eventually go and harvest that fruit. If you're not harvesting the fruit, then it's just getting overripe on the vine and it's going elsewhere. It's going to waste. The annual appeal, really at the end of the day, should exist to help you identify your major gift donors. Period. End of sentence. Yes, it's great that you can count on $100 from, Joe, and that's all you can ever give. And that helps keep your lights on. You can count on that. But if you're not every so many years skimming the cream off the top, then those gifts can and will go elsewhere.
Right. Yeah. And we've talked about that a lot on this podcast too, which is the $50 donor, the $500 donor on your file might be a $50,000 or $500,000 donor in another file. But unfortunately, they're sort of trapped in your annual fund cycle because that's all you ever do to advance the relationship. You don't advance the relationship.
Exactly. Exactly. They get stuck.
Yeah. Yep. And they might like you. They might like caring hearts. But they might think that you're worthy of the $500 gift because that's what you ask for. So they might think that's what they need. That's what they're asking for. They might even be aware that you have a $5 million campaign idea. And unless you start to approach them, they on their own, people are so shockingly ignorant about the causes they support. And I don't mean that I don't mean that in any way to disparage donors or anything. It's just that people have these rich, full, personal lives that have nothing to do with your charity. Exactly. And they just don't wake up in the morning thinking about whether Caring Hearts needs $1 million and what else could they do with $1 million.
Yeah.
They wake up thinking about their kids, their work, their legacy, their values.
Yeah.
That's all amazing things you can tap into.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. You had a guest on the podcast recently who talked about community, and ultimately, it's like the $1 million gift or the $500,000 or $100,000 gift is a byproduct of the fact that you made this person feel that they're going to realize their legacy for their family, for their community through this gift. Mm-hmm. It doesn't start with the gift, it ends with the gift. And they are going to lead your organization on the board or serve on a committee because of that sense of community. They want to be surrounded with like-minded people who share their values. They want to chit chat, before and after the meetings. They want to have an excuse to go talk to their friends about making a gift. It's about community at the end of the day. And when you do that really well, then the money follows.
And that's the value you can offer that that a lot of us don't think about. We think, we're here to extract something from them. It doesn't feel good. What if they don't want to give? Where it's like, well, what are you here to give to them? You're here to give them community. You're here to give them a way to express their values and beliefs. You're here to help them model to their kids what being a good person and a good citizen looks like, and a good dad or a good grandpa, whatever. Like there's so much you actually bring to the table that you have to offer, that it is a value exchange. It's not just you extracting money from them. It is a win-win. Like you're going to win by getting this money and doing something amazing, and they're going to win because through their giving, they get to live a richer expression of who they want to be.
And why keep that from them? Just because you're shy, it's like we have to get beyond our own limiting beliefs, because for some donors, and we have to accept this, $100,000 is the same thing to them as $1,000 is to us. And we just have to understand that and accept that. And if you can kind of get beyond the number of zeros, then you're simply presenting the opportunity. It's either a match or it isn't. But if they're not interested, they're going to send you that message way before you got to the point where you asked for that 6 or 7 figure gift.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's okay, right? It's not for everyone.
You're really looking for those who have a values alignment, and you're simply presenting them the opportunity.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. The last thing I want to ask you is this sounds great. I'm very inspired to go and do this. We're gonna find a key leader. We're gonna get that money. We're gonna get the $5 million. I know we can do it. I'm so excited though to get started that I'm like, do you think we can raise this really quickly? Like, do you think we can just go? Like, what sort of timeline can we expect here? Because I've heard you talk about you could get to seven-figure gifts within 6 months, and that sounds lovely.
Yes, and you and I have had conversations offline about that, where what is realistic, what is possible. And let me just back up a little bit, because there is an assumption here that the board is ready and it's really just a matter of, let's get started. So if an organization is at that point where we have this $5 million idea, what's the starting point for us? Traditionally, there's been two directions that an organization can go. One is to just dive right into a capital campaign, let's get going on this, to varying levels of success. Maybe it all works out great, maybe it doesn't go so well. The other option, which is a very, very common one, is to conduct a feasibility study. And typically when talking to fundraising consultants, that's what we recommend, is we recommend conducting a feasibility study. A feasibility study is a process, it has a beginning, middle, and end. There's a report at the end of it. Boards tend to love that because it provides actual data to be able to make a decision. We as the consultants conduct the conversations with the prospective donors. We uncover what, how high of a priority are you as is Caring Hearts within their top 3 in terms of charities they support? Where do they see themselves landing in terms of a gift? Do they see themselves giving $100,000? And that's where, the consultant can do that heavy lift to uncover which donors are already thinking of you in that way versus which donors, just are, taking themselves out of the top prospect pool. And then we come back with a report and we say, here's how you can raise 5 million, or, actually you can raise more than that, or, let's actually start with a $3 million goal and then see where we land after our top gifts. So it provides the data that an organization needs to proceed in a way that ultimately is going to lead to success, whether that means changing the goal, or maybe there's some initial steps that you need to take before starting the capital campaign. So typically those are the two directions that organizations go. I do have a third way that we're innovating at Philanthropic Fundraising, which we're calling 6 months to 7 figures. For organizations, typically the smaller shops who are kind of stuck in between, they don't necessarily have the resources to invest in a feasibility study, but they need to be successful. So they don't want to just take on a capital campaign, not knowing if they're going to be successful or not. And because the downside of a feasibility study is you spend the money no matter what, and you don't necessarily raise any money at the end of that. And that was something that was, of concern to me when I was working with organization. We can conduct a feasibility study, but then you've spent those resources and you don't necessarily have any additional funds to show for it. So this third way, 6 months to 7 figures, is a way for organizations to get started on the process that's going to lead to a successful capital campaign, which is developing your case for support, recruiting your key leader, and asking for a 6 or 7 figure gift, all within 6 months. And at the end of that, that's really going to be proof positive that you do have a capital campaign on your hands, and it is time to move forward because you have your key gift in place. You have your case for support. You have your key leader. You have all the ingredients for success. Now it's just a matter of going out, rinse and repeat, go and ask other donors. Or you could decide, now is not the time for a capital campaign, but we really just need to elevate our major gift effort. And once you've gone through those 3 steps, you can do that with any prospective donor. You can sit down with them, talk to them about your case for support. You can make sure to buddy up with, another volunteer, and you can ask them for a 6-figure gift, simply presenting the vision for the organization, whether it's couched as part of a capital campaign or not.
Yeah, and so that's the thing I just want to be clear on. You don't need a capital campaign necessarily to be going out and doing this and raising major gifts.
Yeah, you and I both know that you don't
Yeah.
need a capital campaign. Boards love capital campaigns, but if you're an
Right.
executive director and you're like, I just need to raise more money, I don't know
Yeah.
that we need a capital campaign. This is a great alternative. Let's just go through all the same motions that we would go
Yeah.
through for a capital campaign. Let's successfully, maybe we want to increase our annual raise by 20%, it's the same thing. That's kind of the dirty little secret of capital campaign consultants is fundraising is fundraising, whether you're doing a capital campaign or not. It's just, like you said, we have a bigger lever to pull, but it's the same lever.
Yeah. Yeah. And the capital campaign gives you a smart goal. And sometimes we don't realize you can have a smart goal without a building at the end.
Exactly.
You can still make it time bound. You can still make it specific. You can still have something measurable, right? Okay, so 7 figures in 6 months. Have you seen people do that? Like from the time they start to the time they get like a large gift, you can do that in 6 months?
Well, what we found looking back in the time that including my career, my past career, and the time that I started philanthropic fundraising, which was 7 years ago now, that any organization that we've worked with for at least 4 months has secured the largest gift in their organization's history. So that's what inspired me to start the 6 months to 7 figures program. I can't guarantee anything. I can't say it's going to be 7 figures, but we do say that if you follow this process, that your organization will secure the largest gift it has ever received.
Right. Okay, Caring Hearts is in. I need to get into
right.
your program. Well, where can I do that?
Well, right now, probably the best thing is LinkedIn. Follow Philanthropic Fundraising. Look for my name, Gudrun Hofmeister. There's not too many Gudruns running around, Gudrun. And you can find me there. Our website is available as well. We're going to get the email thing working better very soon. So that's why I'm leaning toward LinkedIn is a better way to stay in touch. That's where we're posting. That's where we're keeping folks updated on the 6 months to 7 figure program. And yeah, that's a great starting point, LinkedIn.
Perfect. Yeah. Thanks so much. Will you come back sometime and we can get into 8-figure gifts? How's that?
Any excuse to talk shop. I love to talk shop. And especially for those of us, who are in this business and we know the ins and outs, and we just want to help organizations solve these problems in their community. Let's do this.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for today. Here's my short action plan for you. Pull a list of all of your donors and include a column for first gift, and also include a column for yearly cumulative giving for the last few years. Now, you want to identify people who are not yet major donors, right? You want to identify new major donors. So exclude your current major donors from that list. Then order the list by giving amount. And as we talked about in our conversation, look at people who gave, $500 and up as their first gift. That's a really good indicator. But people who are cumulatively giving over 500, maybe over 1,000, maybe even over 2,000 to your organization every year. Then once you've got that list sorted by giving amount, go through the people. About some donors, you might know their situation, you might not. So identify the top 10 people that you think you can reach out to. Out of that list, identify the top 10 people that you are going to reach out to. Just start with 10 for now. The point is to get started. And the easier you make it for yourself to get started, the more likely that you will actually do it. Now, those 10 people, make a commitment that over the next 60 days, you are going to follow this process that Gudrun has outlined. You're going to start reaching out to them. Set those meetings. That's it. That is your action plan. Identify 10 people that you're going to set meetings with. And all you're looking for really is for 1 or 2 to give you a commitment. That's an early win. That gets you a taste of what this process is like. And if you just keep doing this repeatedly, systematically, you keep booking calls, you keep meeting with people, you keep following this process, that you really can secure the largest gift your organization has ever received. As always, thank you for hanging out with us on the Fundraising Campfire. If you want to be part of Build Good Lives, that is when we do this show, this podcast every now and again. Every 2 weeks, we jump on a live call and we actually do this live in front of an audience. Just go to buildgood.com, sign up with your email address. There's a few different places you can sign up. Just sign up for the list there. You'll get a free training when you do that. And also, you will get invites to future Build Good Lives. If you're listening to this, you're my kind of people. I'm your kind of people. Thank you for the work you do. I'm your host, Mike Dirksen, cheering you on as you do good in the world.